I put $740,000 into my husband's restaurant. He held the grand opening without me. 3 days later, he called asking me to cover the overdue invoices. I smiled and said, "I'm sorry, honey. That money is reserved for close family." Those were the exact words he had used on me. But let me start from the beginning, because this story doesn't begin with a restaurant. It begins with a ring, a promise, and a woman who believed completely and without reservation that love was enough to build a life on. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed CPA with my own accounting firm that I built from scratch at 26, working 60-hour weeks while my friends were going to brunch and complaining about their student loans. I drove a used Honda for 4 years after I started the business because every dollar I made went back into building something real, something mine. I met my husband at a charity gala in downtown Chicago 5 years ago. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming effortlessly, almost accidentally, as if charisma were something that simply leaked out of him without any intention. He had warm eyes and a big laugh, and he talked about his dream of opening a farm-to-table restaurant with the kind of passion that made you want to believe in it too. He was a sous chef at a well-regarded restaurant on the North Side. Talented, according to everyone who had ever tasted his food. Talented, according to me, the very first night he cooked dinner for me in his apartment sea-base with roasted fennel and a lemon beurre blanc that made me close my eyes. We got married 18 months after we met. It was a small wedding, just family and close friends, out in the countryside outside the city. His mother sat in the front row in a cream-colored dress that was almost white, which I noticed but chose not to mention. My mother squeezed my hand during the vows and whispered, "You deserve every happiness." I believed her. The restaurant idea came up seriously about 2 years into our marriage. My husband had left his job to develop the concept a mid-size, upscale but approachable spot in the West Loop neighborhood, the kind of place that gets written up in food magazines and earns a devoted following of regulars who make reservations 2 weeks out. He had a name for it. He had a mood board. He had a chef's table concept and a cocktail program and a sourcing plan for local farms in Illinois and Wisconsin. What he didn't have was money. I had money. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to tell this story as if I were naive. I was not naive. I was a CPA. I understood balance sheets and equity and risk. I ran projections. I reviewed his business plan with the same analytical eye I used for my clients. I identified the gaps. I asked hard questions. He answered them. We had long conversations at the kitchen table with spreadsheets open on my laptop, and he was patient and detailed, and I believed in the numbers because I had helped shape them. I also believed in him. That part matters. It wasn't blind love, it was informed trust, or at least, I thought it was. I invested $740,000. Some of it was savings. Some of it was a low-interest loan I took against my business assets. We structured it formally, with an attorney, a proper investment agreement, ownership stake, the works. I was listed as a 40% equity partner. I signed documents. He signed documents. My name was on the operating agreement. That detail becomes important later. The build-out took 8 months. I was involved in the early stages. I helped select the accountant for the restaurant, reviewed vendor contracts, flagged a clause in the lease that would have cost him an extra $60,000 over 5 years. He was grateful. He said he couldn't do it without me. He said that a lot, actually, in those early months. "I couldn't do this without you, Claire." I heard it so often that at some point I stopped really hearing it. Then something shifted. I can't point to an exact moment. It was gradual. Like a tide going out, you don't notice the water level dropping until you're standing on dry sand wondering where the ocean went. He started taking calls in the other room. He started working later at the restaurant, coming home after I was already in bed. When I asked questions about the progress, the kitchen equipment delivery, the staffing situation, the soft opening timeline, he would give short answers and pivot to something else. I told myself he was stressed. Openings are stressful. I had read enough about the restaurant industry to know that the weeks before a launch are brutal. His mother had moved from Cincinnati to Chicago about 6 months before the opening, ostensibly to help with the final push. She stayed in our guest room, which was fine at first, and then became steadily less fine as the weeks passed. She had opinions about everything: the menu, the decor, the staff uniforms, the way my husband organized the walk-in cooler. She was his mother and I respected that, so I kept my observations to myself. But she also had opinions about me. She never said anything directly. It was always sideways, the kind of commentary that's designed to land and then evaporate if you try to hold it up to the light. When I suggested we review the opening weekend marketing one evening at dinner, she looked at my husband and said, "You really do have everything handled, don't you?" As if I hadn't spoken. When I offered to be at the restaurant during the final week of preparation to help coordinate with the vendors, something I was eminently qualified to do, she said, with a thin smile, "Oh, Claire, you worry too much. Let the professionals handle it." I was a professional. I had been handling things since before her son knew what a quarterly estimate was. But I smiled and said nothing, because my husband was right there, and he didn't contradict her, and I told myself that wasn't meaningful. Then came the week before the opening. My husband sat me down one evening after his mother had gone to bed. He was calm, which in retrospect was its own kind of signal, the deliberate calm of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say. He told me that the opening weekend was going to be very high pressure. He said he needed to keep the environment tight and focused. He said that he had thought carefully about the guest list for the opening night dinner, the soft launch, invitation only, just the people who would set the tone for the restaurant's reputation going forward. He said he hoped I would understand that this was a professional event, not a personal one. I sat very still. "What are you telling me?" I asked. "I'm telling you," he said, "that I've kept the opening guest list to close family and key industry people. Food writers, investors, a few chef friends, people who are specifically positioned to influence how the restaurant lands. I'm your wife," I said, "and I own 40% of that restaurant." He nodded, as if I had said something reasonable but ultimately beside the point. "I know. And you'll be involved going forward, of course. But for the opening night specifically, I need the room to be curated." I stared at him for a long moment. "Your mother will be there?" I asked. "She's been instrumental in the final preparations," he said. I didn't say anything else that night. I went to bed and lay in the dark and felt something cold move through me. Not rage, not yet. Something quieter and more clarifying. The sensation of a thing becoming visible that had always been there. The opening was on a Friday. I know because I sat in my office that evening and watched the restaurant's Instagram account post photos in real time: the glowing dining room, the artful plates, the full tables, the congratulatory faces. My mother-in-law appeared in 2 photos, beaming next to my husband in his chef's whites. There were captions about the family behind the food. My husband's sister was there, his college roommate, his former culinary school instructor. I was not there. I had funded 40% of every light fixture, every piece of custom millwork, every plate and glass and linen in that room, and I was watching it on my phone from a leather chair in my own office. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I have thought about why I didn't cry, and I think it's because somewhere in the preceding weeks, a part of me had already done the math and arrived at an answer I hadn't let myself consciously acknowledge yet. My body understood before my mind did. I closed Instagram. I opened a different app, the one connected to the joint account we used for household expenses. I looked at some recent transactions. Then I opened my email and looked at something I had noticed 2 weeks earlier but set aside, a document attached to a vendor confirmation that had been CC'd to me by mistake. I read it carefully, then I read it again. My signature was on it. I had not signed it. It was a secondary financing agreement with a kitchen equipment supplier, a deferred payment structure that my husband had apparently arranged without telling me, using my name and my accounting firm's credentials as a guarantor. The signature was close. Not perfect, but close. Close enough that someone who wasn't looking for it wouldn't look. I was a CPA. I was always looking. I forwarded the document to my personal email. Then I called my attorney, not the one we had used together for the investment agreement, but my personal attorney, a woman named Sandra, who had handled my business formation and whom I trusted completely. It was 8:45 on a Friday night. She answered on the third ring. I need to meet with you first thing Monday morning, I said. I need you to look at something. How urgent? Sandra asked. The signature on a financing document is not mine, I said. But it looks like mine. There was a pause. Monday at 8, she said. I spent the weekend being very quiet and very thorough. I pulled together every document related to the restaurant investment, the operating agreement, the equity structure, the vendor contracts I had reviewed, the loan documents. I created a folder. I organized it the way I organize everything, methodically and completely, because if there is one thing I know how to do, it is to make a case from paper. I also had a conversation with my husband that weekend. He came home Saturday morning in a good mood, buoyant from the opening night. He talked about the reviews they were expecting, the reservations that were already coming in, the food writer from a major publication who had been there and seemed genuinely impressed. I listened. I asked a few questions. I said, I saw the photos. It looked like a beautiful night. He said, it really was. Next time you'll be there, of course. I smiled. Of course, I said. Sunday afternoon, his mother sat across from me at the kitchen table while my husband was out running errands. She was drinking coffee, and she looked at me with that expression she sometimes had assessing, like she was calculating something. You handled this weekend very graciously, she said. It was not a compliment. It was an evaluation. Thank you, I said. Some women would have made a scene, she said. I'm glad you're not that type. Marcus needs someone steady right now. The restaurant is his moment. I looked at her over my coffee mug. It's my moment too, I said pleasantly. I own 40% of it. She smiled the thin smile. Of course, she said. I said nothing else. But I thought, you're living in a condo I own. You've been staying in a guest room in a home that is in my name. And your son just used my credentials to sign a document I never signed. I kept those thoughts very still inside me, like water behind a dam. Monday morning, Sandra reviewed the document. By Monday afternoon, she had consulted with a colleague who specialized in financial fraud. The conclusion was what I had already known. The signature was not mine. The use of my firm's credentials as guarantor was unauthorized. And as a 40% equity partner, I had not been consulted on or consented to a material financial obligation incurred in my name. What do you want to do? Sandra asked. I want to know all of my options, I said. She laid them out. There were several. Some were nuclear, and some were measured, and some were somewhere in between. I listened to all of them. I asked questions. I took notes. I thought about the restaurant, my money in every wall, every pot, every reservation currently being booked by people who had no idea that the woman who made it possible wasn't even in the room when it opened. I thought about the photos on Instagram, my mother-in-law's beaming face. I thought about my husband's voice, close family and key industry people. I told Sandra I would call her Wednesday. The call came Tuesday. My husband called at 11 in the morning. I was in a client meeting and let it go to voicemail. He called again at 11:15. I stepped out and answered. Hey, he said. His voice had a tight quality. I recognized the sound of a problem he hadn't anticipated. I need to talk to you about something. Okay, I said. There are some invoices from the opening weekend. The floral vendor, the rental company, the PR firm. They're due, and the restaurant's operating account is there was a cash flow issue with the equipment financing, and I need to cover them from somewhere else temporarily. I let a moment pass. How much? I asked. He told me. It was a significant number. I was thinking you could transfer from your business savings, he said. Just temporarily, until the revenue starts flowing. 2 or 3 weeks, tops. I stood in the hallway outside my conference room. Through the glass wall, I could see my client looking at his phone, waiting for me. Sweetheart, I said, and I kept my voice very warm, very even. I'm so sorry. I can't use those funds for the restaurant right now. Claire, it's urgent. Those accounts are reserved for close family and key business obligations, I said. You understand. I have to be careful about where that money goes. There was silence on his end. What does that mean? He said. It means what it means, I said. You said it yourself last week, actually. I thought it made a lot of sense. Claire. I have to get back to my client, I said. Let's talk tonight. I went back into the conference room. I finished the meeting. And then I called Sandra and told her to begin the process we had discussed. That evening, I sat my husband down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had once spread out spreadsheets together and built something we called a shared dream, and I laid out what I knew. The unauthorized signature, the financing agreement, the use of my professional credentials without my consent. I watched his face move through several expressions in quick succession. His mother came into the kitchen partway through, and I looked at her and said, pleasantly, "Could you give us a few minutes? This is a private conversation." She looked at her son. He didn't say anything. She left. I told my husband that Sandra was filing a formal dispute regarding the unauthorized financing agreement. I told him that as a 40% equity partner, I was exercising my rights under the operating agreement to request a full financial audit of the restaurant's accounts. I told him that the condo where his mother was currently staying was titled in my name alone, and that her extended stay would need to be reconsidered. "You're doing this now," he said. "The restaurant just opened." "You opened it without me," I said. "You used my money, my name, my signature, without me. So yes, we're handling this now." "I made a mistake," he said. "With the signature I panicked. The supplier needed a guarantor and I couldn't reach you." "You could have reached me," I said. "You chose not to." He was quiet. "I want you to think carefully," I said, "about what you want the next chapter of this to look like. Because right now there are several directions this could go, and some of them are much better for you than others. I don't want to imply that what followed was easy or clean, because it wasn't. Marriages don't unwind cleanly. There were difficult conversations and there were nights that were hard in ways. I won't detail here because some things belong only to the people who lived them. My mother-in-law left the condo within the week. She was angry. I understood that. I didn't need her to not be angry. What I needed was for things to be true. The financial audit revealed what I had already suspected, that the restaurant's accounts had been managed in ways that were not consistent with our agreement, and that there were obligations I had not been informed of and had not consented to. Sandra was thorough and relentless in the way that good attorneys are, and by the time the process ran its course, the equity structure had been renegotiated under terms that were finally honest. I'm not going to tell you I burned it all down. That's not who I am. The restaurant is still open. It's doing reasonably well. Actually, the food writer did publish a favorable review, and they've built a solid lunch business. I maintained my equity stake. It is administered at arm's length now, through Sandra's office, and I receive my quarterly distributions, and I do not attend events there. I have, for what it's worth, moved on in the ways that matter. What I want to say, and this is the part I think about most, the part that keeps me up sometimes, not with grief but with something that feels more like resolve, is that I knew how to read a balance sheet, and I knew how to read a contract, and somewhere, in the part of me that I had quieted down for the sake of the marriage, I had known how to read the signs too. The lesson I carry is this: being capable of love and being capable of analysis are not opposites. You can use both. You should use both. The people who take advantage of generous women do so because they count on the love drowning out the analysis. My love did not drown out my analysis. It just took me a little while to let them work together. And when my husband called asking me to cover invoices for the grand opening of the restaurant, I had funded the opening I had not been invited to, and I smiled and said, "I'm sorry, honey. Those funds are reserved for close family." I was not being cruel. I was simply, finally, speaking a language he had taught me.